The old central neighborhoods are packed in tight below an eternal organic haze. In other cities, you breathe industrial contaminants, but in LA, you breathe amino acids. The hazy sprawl is ringed and netted with glowing lines, like hot wires in a toaster. At the outlet of the canyon, it comes close enough that the light sharpens and breaks up into stars, arches, glowing letters.
Hello, this is Jesse Dukes coming at you from the cozy confines of my camper in Ivy, Virginia. I've got a nice wood stove fire here, and this is Upper Middlebrow. It's a podcast where me and my friend Chris Bagg talk about cultural products, mostly books, that we like, that represent, in our view, high craft, but are also entertaining. This is episode 1, and we're starting with Neal Stephenson's 1992 novel, Snow Crash. So it is right now, as I record this, November 2022, and we taped this episode back in July. And since then, we've gone through a piloting process. We've thought about our format. We've played a few pilots for some test listeners. We've made some changes, some decisions. We've tightened some parts up. So this one was our first one, and it might sound a little bit rough to you. We were experimenting. We were working things out. And we were super excited, but we think at its core, it's still a good conversation and worth sharing. So I'm just going to share it with you. The next 7 minutes or so is us kind of excitedly catching up with one another. So if you want to skip that and get right into Snow Crash, skip about 7 minutes from this moment right now. And let's just get right into it. I want to tell you, before we get into our topic, I did something I haven't done in 11 years since I last talked to you.
My God.
Which was surf Small Point.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Isn't it?
I mean, first of all, I think we haven't talked a lot. I know we've talked more often than 11 years ago, which was a hilarious dangling modifier that you just left in there. But that is super funny because I had a visiting writer friend here last week, and I pulled out my copy of Surfer's Journal, and I was like, there's my first real byline, a story about Small Point, Maine, and my friend Jesse Dukes.
Ah, well, very exciting. It is unchanged as far as I can tell, or at least very similar. One of the things I learned, so listener, this is a beach in Maine with a very well-known and hard-to-reach surf break because many people have built private homes in the place where it would be easiest to access it. There are other ways that are legal to get there, but they involve walking over public lands a great distance, which is what I did. One of the things I learned on this trip is that, and I had never really figured this out before, I always suspected it, it's actually much faster to park at Popham Beach and walk there than it is
and just walk down the beach?
Well, than to park at Morse Mountain, which the
and
trail.
Walk over the goddamn mountain through the mosquitoes.
Through the mosquitoes, yes. Which is and I think the only advantage of going over Morse Mountain is that you can do that dry, whereas if you walk over the beach at Popham, you have to wade a tidal creek. But if you're already wearing your wetsuit, who cares? If you were trying to make a day out of it, and you didn't want to get wet right away, you might go Morse Mountain.
Right, but you're going to be wearing your wetsuit anyway going over Morse Mountain because that's the only way to fend off. Listener, when we talk about mosquitoes, we are not talking about your run-of-the-mill sort of central New England mosquitoes. We are talking about rabid coast of Maine bloodsuckers, and a lot of them. They are. What was the Stevenson's metaphor comparing the metacops to the enforcers? It was something like, oh God, it was a great metaphor. It was something like the Salvation Army compared to the Green Berets or something like that. Yes, it is. I'm looking for it right now. Yeah, if you can find it, that's the relationship of kind of normal, fat, lazy New England mosquitoes to these a-hole mosquitoes. Anyway, it was great. I actually surfed there twice, which is why I was able to do that comparison, and it was pretty good both times. And both times I almost didn't do it because it was a long-ass walk. And also from far away at low tide, it looks like there's no surf. You look out and you're like, there's no surf.
and then you paddle out, and then there might be a solid, 2 to 3 foot longboard waves breaking out there, but it looks like it's ankle high because the beach is like a half mile wide or something like that.
I know. I badly need to get back in the water. My parents finally took that great 710 that I somehow wrangled away from Chris Riley, and I think they donated it, for God's sakes. But that is just an excuse for me to finally make good on my 14-year commitment to purchase a longboard here in the state of Oregon.
Yeah, it's a good state for surfing. It's cold. You'll need a 5 mil suit, I believe, in Oregon.
Oh, yeah.
For most. Maybe you can get away.
Sure.
Maybe you can get away with a 4.3 in the summer when the water is merely 59 degrees and not like 48 degrees Fahrenheit. And
What season wetsuit is it in Chicago?
summer.
That was supposed to be a joke.
Oh no, I've surfed Chicago. You can surf Chicago. It not very often, but it's doable.
Yeah.
But let's dive into the purpose of our conversation. The premise of our show is that we pick a work of art, in this case a novel. I don't think it has to be a novel. It could be a movie or something like that, that is well-known and well-regarded, and we consume it and talk about it. And so this week we read the first half, roughly, of Neal Stephenson's 1992 novel Snow Crash, which we've both read at least more than once each before. Let's do a first half plot recap, if possible, for the listeners. And
I'm excited. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, no, this is fun. This is really, really fun. Can I do the first chapter? I really want to do the first chapter.
I mean, I think you're looking at the first 2 chapters, really, because those are really of a piece. But give us the go until you run out of steam.
Okay,
and
so
then I will try to pick up the thread, and then we'll have some hilarious moments where neither of us remembers what happened next.
Right. No, and it's really interesting. The structure of the early chapters is interesting. But in the first chapter, we meet a pizza deliverator who is wearing a bulletproof costume and has kind of a race car supplied to him by the mafia. And he's delivering pizzas in the San Fernando Valley, and we gather it's sort of a dystopian kind of collapsed government future in which all the suburban enclaves have become sovereign independent states, and that's the landscape he's delivering pizzas in. And he works for the mafia. The mafia owns the pizza joint, and they have promised they'll get the pizza there within 30 minutes, or else the leader of the mafia, Uncle Enzo, has to come and deliver apology and they get like a free pizza and a trip to Italy if the pizza is late. So the stakes are very, very high, and our deliverator is handed a pizza that's already like 22 minutes have passed out of the 30 minutes allotted. And so suddenly our pizza deliverator, who is also one of the 2 hero/protagonists of the story.
I'm laughing because I know what's coming next.
Whose name we learn very shortly is Hiro Protagonist, although that happens a little bit later, is set off on a quest to try to drive through several suburban enclaves with this supercar in order to deliver the pizza on time. And along the way, he picks up a skateboard hitchhiker who attaches to the back of his car with a magnetic harpoon, and then he wrecks his car in a swimming pool. I think that's the first 2 chapters.
I believe the phrase in the phrase in question at the moment is, and the car does a stuka into the swimming pool.
The car does a stuka into the swimming pool, right?
Oh, which is like one of those just Stevenson-esque sentences that you think, my God, this guy.
There's some great sentences in this book. Yeah.
Oh, good Lord. But if we stop to admire them all, we're never going to get through anything more than the synopsis. After that, we fast forward some time and we hang out with Hiro and his roommate who live in a storage unit. This chapter is basically here to introduce the concept of the metaverse, which is actually a term that Stevenson coined in this book. And and is with us even today, as I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about later. But we find out that the metaverse is a virtual reality place where you can plug into, and then you inhabit an avatar and can go to clubs, and it's very Ready Player One for those of you that have seen that. So we learn about the metaverse, and then we kind of shift back to the other protagonist of the story, who goes by the moniker YT, and we find out what that means a little bit later. In the act of delivering the pizza that Hiro was not able to deliver. She does get it there on time, setting up the narrative conceit that Hiro owes the Mafia a new car, but the Mafia owes YT a favor.
Terrific. And I have a question about this. I'm going to try to speed things up a little bit here too. So let me see if I can do it. We learn through Hiro's ex-girlfriend in the metaverse that there is a scary guy named Raven who's both physically scary, but is also disseminating a computer virus that is also some kind of human pathogen. And it particularly affects hackers, including Hiro's friend and former colleague, David, who's rendered comatose. And Hiro, with some hints from Juanita and a electronic librarian butler and a stack of data, begins trying to figure out what's going on with this virus. Meanwhile, YT is arrested by some cops, put into jail, and Hiro helps her get out, and they escape to a autonomous, like a little mini enclave called Mr. Lee's Hong Kong. And aided by a robotic, incredibly fast-moving, nuclear-powered robotic dog/rat.
Called The Rat Thing. Which is one of like Stevenson's kind of throwaway descriptions that actually is amazingly apt given the world that he has come up with. I wanted to say, as we meet Raven later on, I imagine him as being played by basically a combination of Dwayne Johnson and John Wick.
Oh, I was thinking Jason Momoa would be Raven.
Oh, that would also be really good. Yeah, I could really see that as a perfect fit. But yeah, he is hulking and terrifying. Okay, so yeah, we get YT gets rescued from the clink by Hiro. Hiro gets into a sword fight inside the metaverse, where we learn that he is the greatest sword fighter in the world. And then we also start learning some background information about what's going on. And in particular, one very important character named L. Bob Reif, who is kind of a robber baron, Rupert Murdoch figure who has purchased sort of a remainder United States Navy aircraft carrier.
Yeah. The USS Enterprise, in fact, the nuclear carrier.
Which again, like, you can just hear Stevenson like not being able to resist the jokes.
Yeah. Well, there I love, and neither can L. Bob Reif, right? Because he tells the Rockefeller joke about the yacht size.
Which and is like one of my favorite things about this book, that it had the sort of like action novel appeal to 14-year-old Chris, but then is also so full of these in-jokes and self-referential things and like loops and circles that it frankly is kind of fucking mind-boggling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we should, and I think looking at your sort of proto questions and mine, I think why is one of the things we're going to talk about tonight too. All right, I'll see. I mean, like, I don't know that we need that much more plot in terms of, I mean, there's a series of adventures that ensue in which essentially Hiro starts to figure out that this guy Raven and this guy L. Bob Reif are up to something together involving this computer virus, biohacking, linguistic hacking thing, blood serum virus that some various people are distributing, including Raven, but also a bunch of religious fanatics. And YT, who has teamed up with Hiro at this point, with some help from the mafia and with some help from some other people, are also sort of trying to gather intelligence on what's going on. But we get the sense of a kind of looming threat. And in the sort of final chapters, we get the sense that this threat has something to do with L. Bob Reif's yacht, which is the aircraft carrier, and a whole raft, literally and figuratively, of other boats that have sort of tied themselves to these yachts and are kind of drifting around the Pacific, full of refugees who are intending to kind of forcefully immigrate to the United States. Is that enough of a plot synopsis? Is there anything else we really need to understand at this point before we get into the why of it all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, with Stephenson, there is a sort of central plot and then just these amazing spirals of window dressing that are a lot of the pleasure of the book. I think we couldn't, we should really not pass over the fact that Raven, along with being an incredibly dangerous hand-to-hand fighter, he wields a set of glass knives, and there's a lot of descriptions of him cutting people open in increasingly innovative ways, but that he's also hauling around a nuclear warhead in his motorcycle sidecar. Right. And he is essentially a nuclear sovereign nation as one of the cop. One thing that Stephenson does really well is really raise the stakes in ways that I find to be really admirable. It's like watching a high wire act above like a pool of piranhas that are swimming in acid.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you're referring to a scene in which Raven single-handedly takes on several members of the Crips gang during a rock concert that Hiro has promoted, all of which I think the only plot purpose of that is just to establish that Raven is extremely dangerous. But it's incredibly entertaining. And I think it also starts establishing Hiro's journey. As we learn that Hiro is a pretty good, I would say, amateur sword fighter. He carries around a couple of Japanese swords, but I don't believe he's ever actually gotten into a real fight. He gets into fights in the metaverse, but I think part of what's being set up here is that at some point Raven and Hiro might have some kind of confrontation, or at least we're meant to suspect that might be coming at some point. And this is incredibly intimidating for Hiro, who is a kind of nerdy hacker type, despite the fact that he walks around in bulletproof clothing and carries suits. He's really kind of just like a Silicon Valley software developer who happens to have some eccentric hobbies like sword fighting.
Yeah, there's that great line when he's talking to Squeaky the Enforcer, and Hiro says something like, people who've been cut up with swords don't look like this. And the Enforcer's like, you cut up a lot of people with swords, Mr. Protagonist? And Hiro says, in the metaverse. Yeah. And again, this is like a great, very funny throwaway moment. That scene where he's facing off against Raven in the bamboo, is just one of those amazing scenes where you're like, okay, this is straight out of every single anime film or show that I saw when I was 16. And at the same time is doing something, much more worrisome than that. And really does such a great job of dramatizing that Hiro thinks he's doing the right thing, but suspects that maybe he just got lucky in fending off Raven. But everything about that scene, the Thrasher concert, which is headlined by
Vitaly
a band
Chernobyl.
Called Vitaly Chernobyl and the Meltdowns.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, Chris, because as we're describing this plot, if you hadn't read this book, our description, you would just be completely lost. Right, we've done a reasonably good job describing the plot of the first half of the book, but you would have no idea what we were talking about if you hadn't read the book. And it's interesting. I think it actually relates to one of the topics too, which is I think the first time I read this when I was in my 20s, I didn't really understand what was happening, but I still found it incredibly entertaining.
Yeah. tell me about that first reading of
I don't.
yours.
You know what? I don't remember it very well, to be honest. But I think what I really there is. I was watching a documentary about Star Wars, and George Lucas was talking about how he would go and watch feature movies as a kid, and they would go in and you'd instead of watching one movie, you'd go and you'd watch a series of kind of serials, like in the 50s. So you'd see like Tarzan's Adventure with the like gray people, part 7 of 3. And a lot of times you would go in, or you'd see a Western, but you wouldn't necessarily have seen the earlier reels. Like you wouldn't have necessarily, so you'd be thrown into this movie, and he described the experience of being able to kind of follow the human story without really understanding what was going on. And he said that actually purposefully, when he made the first Star Wars movie, which we now call Episode 4 A New Hope, but at the time was called Star Wars, that's what he was going for. And that's why he named it Episode 4. It wasn't because he necessarily ever intended of making 1, 2, and 3. He wanted to kind of create this sense of there's a story you can follow, but you also don't really need to know what's going on. And I think that's the way I read it the first time. Like I didn't really understand why what Raven was up to. I mean, I understood that there was some kind of virus and it messed with people's brains, and that Hiro was trying to stop him. But I didn't really follow the whole raft thing. I didn't really follow the Namshub of Enki exposition. I just was sort of like, there's this kind of hacker with swords who's going after this kind of like Inuit guy, and they're having an adventure through LA and a raft.
I'm going to boy, do I want to pick up that thread of George Lucas not intending for there to be other movies surrounding episodes 4, 5, and 6.
And it would have been a much better world if he had stuck with that vision.
I know, but I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to do it. We're not tonight, Jesse.
All right. That's a story for another day.
Do it another night. Yeah, when we read through the collected works of Timothy Zahn, maybe that.
I've read some of those books. They're actually pretty well written, but
it's a time and a place.
I would say that's more like lower middlebrow than upper middlebrow.
Yeah, that's for our third podcast.
Well, you have a question here that I'm intrigued about, a metaverse question, and I have a question for you about the opening chapter that I really want to ask.
Nice. Okay, my question about the metaverse, half joking, half serious. It's a 2-part question. The first part is, do you think Mark Zuckerberg has read Snow Crash? And then the second part, if Mark Zuckerberg has read Snow Crash, which character in the book do you think he most identifies with?
I think he has read Snow Crash, and I think that when he renamed Facebook Meta, there was some reporting around that. But I don't know, maybe he didn't, because there would be copyright issues. I think he has read it, and I think that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't realize it's satire, and the world that Stephenson describing is not a world most of us would enjoy living in. And so for that reason, I think he probably most identifies with Hiro Protagonist. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. This is a setup. I think he identifies with Hiro Protagonist, but I'm pretty sure he's L. Bob Reif.
That's a very good point.
Right?
Everybody is the hero of their own story. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I also think that I think there are people out there in the world who, I have a friend like this who really think it would be fun to live in this world where the U.S. government has collapsed and we've had hyperinflation and there are no laws and you can carry guns around and, everything is a corporate. I think there's people who actually think that would be a humane, fun world to live in too. And I think many of them work in the tech industry.
I'm kind of imagining our listener at the moment who's like, wait a second, what? Like, that is something that we just kind of glossed over, that we didn't bring up. Yeah, there's no laws. There's no U.S. government.
Yeah.
Everybody lives in franchises called burbclaves.
Not everybody, but a lot of people who can afford to and don't want to, have to face hand-to-hand combat on a daily basis.
My other question, and this sort of touches on the hyperinflation thing, right towards the end of the section that we read, YT is trying to buy some Snow Crash, and she only has $1.5 quadrillion with her. And she pulls out a handful of bills, and the drug dealers say this girl wants to pay in Mises, which I'm pretty sure is a reference to Ed Meese, the Attorney General under Ronald Reagan.
I think that's right.
Which is like, I'm not even quite sure what the joke is there, but I know that it's a joke, and it's one of those things where I'm like, who is this joke for, Neal Stephenson?
So the book was written in 92, right? And Gippers, we're going to assume, probably refers to Ronald Reagan himself, right?
To Reagan's, and that seems to be the biggest denomination of a bill that you can find is a Gipper.
Is a Gipper. Well, but of course, everybody would agree that like a Hong Kong buck or whatever is, or what do they call it? A Kong buck is like actually...
Kong buck.
Yeah, is actually a much more stable currency. I think the implication is that we're in a future, and my sense is that Snow Crash is set in about now. Like, 2010 to 2020, something like Hiro seems to be about our age, like to have been born about the time that we were born. Right. And I think he's in his mid 30s, maybe late 30s. And so it's maybe like 2015 or something like that. And I think the implication is that Ed Meese was elected president sometime in the intervening before the collapse of the United States government. And I don't remember much about Ed Meese other than he was involved in some kind of tech scandal and was the attorney general under Reagan. But I think that's the implication of that joke. But I agree, I don't fully understand the joke.
My God, that did make it much better. I do love that maybe Ed Meese was the last president of the United States
who maybe brought about the collapse. I mean, it would be sort of like, I'm trying to think of what it... Yeah.
Donald Trump being elected president?
Well, it would have been like making that joke 20 years ago, right? Or, and this book is 30 years old now. It would have been... I'm trying to think of what the equivalent joke would be today, but I think like Donald Trump blew up all those jokes, like... I just don't know. You can't get more absurd without getting sort of Hitler-esque, I don't know. I mean, maybe you could go like in the liberal direction. You could be sort of like, I don't know who the equivalent would be, or like President Kardashian,
Or like if Walter Mondale had somehow managed to defeat Reagan in the worst landslide defeat in history, something like that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of like, is there a cabinet member who is sort of odious now, but also, maybe some, but like President Cruz might be sort of like an equivalent joke today. Or President Manchin, perhaps. Okay, so this is my question about the opening chapter, and I have two answers to it, but I will hold off until I hear what your answers are. My question is, I think if you were to simply map the plot of this novel, there's only real two purposes to this chapter, the very first chapter. When you get to the YT completing the pizza delivery, I suppose that creates one more. But I think the main purpose of this chapter in terms of the plot is for our two protagonists to meet one another. I think just about everything else that happens at that point, you could start from the day that roughly the 48-hour period that the first half of the book takes place in, that starts with the concert, the Vitaly Chernobyl concert, which is happening roughly the same time that Hiro's visiting the metaverse and having these adventures there with Raven and Juanita. All of this is happening in about 48 hours. You could start the book there. And yet we start it roughly 6 weeks before that in this scene that doesn't really have anything much to do with the plot that then takes place in the quest that Hiro and YT go on to sort of figure out what's going on with the Snow Crash virus and the forces behind it. So I guess my question is, what do you think the purpose of that opening chapter is?
That is such a good question. I don't know if I can answer it in, I don't know, the 30 or 40 minutes that we have remaining. I'll do my best. I'll take a stab at it. I kind of want to read the first paragraph as part of my answer. How do you feel about that?
Go ahead.
Okay. So, chapter 1. The Deliberator belongs to an elite order, a hallowed subcategory. He's got esprit up to here. Right now, he is preparing to carry out his third mission of the night. His uniform is black as activated charcoal, filtering the very light out of the air. A bullet will bounce off its arachnofiber weave like a wren hidden in a patio door, but excess perspiration wafts through it like a breeze through a freshly napalmed forest. Where his body has bony extremities, the suit has sintered armor gel. Feels like gritty jello, protects like a stack of telephone books. Now, I don't know about you, but that paragraph made quite an impression on 14-year-old Chris, sitting in an armchair in the Westboro Public Library waiting for my mom to pick me up from wherever. I still get chills reading that, and, you know, most of it is the power of nostalgia. I mean, so many things about it jump out at me as different from the rest of the book. The sentence structure is much shorter and much more declarative. I mean, what we're doing is like a classic strong start in any kind of movie. This book cries out to be turned into a movie, something that I think has been attempted a few times and then abandoned several times. I think that this book would be wildly lessened without the first two chapters about the pizza delivery, because I don't think I've ever read what is essentially a section of exposition that has esprit up to here, the way that this exposition does. The compression and the amount of world detail that he's able to get into such a small space does such an incredible job of setting the scene and being entertaining at the same time. Now, some of this is probably due to the testosterone-fueled subject material, swords, ninja outfits, what I'm pretty sure is a Lamborghini Countach that delivers pizza, a tiny gun that obliterates everything in its way. And yeah, I think that this what this chapter is doing is it is displaying that Hiro had a very nice, simple, straightforward, declarative life delivering pizzas for the mafia. And it gets completely messed up by one late pizza. And it's just like a great exercise in both scene setting and exposition and character notes. We really are coming in the middle of something. Like, Hiro's story has kind of concluded before this book picks up.
Yeah.
He's kind of given up.
Yeah.
And he likes his life as a deliberator. And it's, you know, it's sexy and probably pays okay and doesn't require him to do a lot of the tech jobby stuff that we find out later he was good at but maybe didn't love. And it all gets ruined, and he gets saved by the other protagonist, YT. And the chapter does such an incredible job of weaving together the threads that are going to then unspool into the rest of the narrative throughout the book. You could start this chapter in the You Store It with Hiro and Vitali. I don't think it would work.
Yeah. Well, I think I agree with like 90% of what you said. And I think the key word is exposition, because I think also rereading the first half of this book, there's so much exposition. The world that in order to understand the plot that we're going to be sort of taken through, you need to understand, or at least be exposed to so many ideas about the world. In particular, all of this like biohacking. I mean, how many chapters are just Hiro talking to a robot librarian about pre-biblical Mesopotamian religion and linguistic theory? Several, right?
Several chapters.
So I feel like Stephenson is a master novelist. He recognizes if he's going to put that into the first half of the book, he's got to set the hook hardcore, right? Yeah. And so I think that first chapter, it is exposition. It does introduce us to this sort of economic collapse dystopian. We kind of get the world that we're in, where there are no laws and there are burbclaves, which are autonomous countries, and you can, harpoon a car on the freeway and you can take a shot at somebody who's doing that and try to kill them, and there's no laws, and the cops are corporate employees, and they even have credit card, this is not in the chapter, but they have credit card receivers for bribes. You can bribe them using your credit card. And I think that's what's going on here, is that Stephenson recognizes he's going to dump a lot of exposition to tell the story he wants to tell. So he wants to make sure you're hooked. And I think that's also the reason that in the early chapters where we're learning about the metaverse and we're learning about Hiro's life, and, we do have that nice description of the dying light over Englewood coming into the You Store It and all of that. I think he knows he's got a lot of exposition coming up, and that's why he keeps YT's narrative that's established in that time frame, in that those opening chapters. It's interspersed with the, Hiro and Vitali going to the concert and Hiro logging into the metaverse. We keep going back to YT and hearing about that very first night where she delivers the pizza and then breaks out of jail. It's kind of like Inarito or Guillermo Arriaga plot, where two things are happening at the same time. But I do think, my best explanation is the chapter. It hooks you like nothing else. And I was thinking of like the literary influences on that chapter, and the people, what came to mind was Douglas Adams, particularly the phrase about pizza delivery. And Hunter Thompson. To me, that the first chapter really reads, it's got that kind of Hunter Thompson hyperbole in it, in a way that the rest of the book occasionally does. But that chapter is just loaded with those kinds of descriptions. Like this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I think that it kind of takes off from where, from what you just said about like Douglas Adams and Hunter S. Thompson.
And the third one I would add to that is William Gibson too. And it's important to remember that this novel came out, 8 years after Neuromancer.
No, totally. And I think, if you read Zodiac, Stevenson's first novel, versus this one, they are almost just unrecognizable. Sure, an author's first novel is always going to be, them kind of finding their feet. But Zodiac is a very dutiful, environmental, treatise of a novel. Yep. Pretty straightforward narratively. And then you get this book, and you're totally right. Like, without Neuromancer, this book doesn't exist. The thing that interests me is how many books don't exist without Snow Crash? This book comes out in 1992. Infinite Jest is probably being written as Snow Crash comes out. And there are so many echoes in that book to this one. The same sort of vaguely post-American kind of landscape where pretty terrible things are going on, but you can kind of still recognize it.
Stevenson's having more of a lark with it, right? I feel like Wallace is a little more troubled by the Wallace is still having fun in Infinite Jest, but he's also kind of weighed down by the I think what it would be like to live in that world. Yeah,
I think and that's sort of one of my observation here is that this book does read this huge send up of postmodernism, but then at the same time it's embracing all of the same things that the postmodernists are into in terms of self-referentiality. He's got the ideas kind of wrapped around the brainstem of the book. The book is called Snow Crash. Yeah. Snow Crash is a computer process. It's a virus. It's a religion. It's something that happens to you. It's passed on through sex and drugs. So you spend a lot of time, and my experience with this book is that I have treated it like a virus. This is the book that I probably recommend to people more than any other book in the world. Wow. And you read this book when you're 14 and it's 1993 and you're kind of lonely and you're kind of into Dungeons and Dragons and you're kind of a jock and you're kind of a nerd. like this book was written like this book feels like it was written with like me in mind. Of course, I know that's not true.
It's kind of true.
But I mean,
not
like,
literally you, but
yeah, the kid who's reading his player's handbook on the way to soccer practice.
Yeah.
That's that is.
No, and
it.
Stevenson is a jock nerd, just like Chris Bagg, and so is Hiro. And I aspire to being a jock nerd too. Although
you are a jock nerd, Jesse Dukes.
Well, thank you.
Definitely. But the name, like when you, I mean, even at 14, I was able to recognize that something funny was going on with the name Hiro Protagonist.
Right.
And YT points out, stupid name, and then Hiro says, but you'll never forget it, which is basically how I introduce myself now when people are like Bag, and I'm like, yeah, it's a dumb name, but you'll never forget it. That's one of the, I've been realizing upon rereading this again, just how many like echoes of this book like float around in my brain all of the time. As a cyclist, whenever a car pulls up next to me, I watch its front tires because that's what YT does to figure out where cars are going when she is poon surfing them on the highway.
She's right. Listener, if you're not aware, she has a skateboard with these sort of like computer-controlled wheels that allows her to kind of, Marty McFly style, grab the back, except for she uses a little like magnetic harpoon. Actually, not unlike a piece of Star Wars technology, the harpoon that Luke Skywalker uses to access the harpoon that Luke Skywalker uses to access the AT-AT Walker in Episode 5 in the first reel. Sorry,
Perfect.
I had to go full nerd voice there. You know what I'm talking about. That's the harpoon. I mean, I think that's the origin of the harpoon.
Yeah.
That
Exactly
and like
it.
Actual harpoons, but it's a magnetic. Like you asked me my impression of it too, and I read this in my 20s, and I had read Neuromancer. So to me, I did read this as a kind of rollicking satire, but rollicking, very affectionate satire of cyberpunk.
Totally.
Like he's not. It's not a takedown. I'm sure he loves William Gibson novels and Bruce Sterling, but basically like let's have fun in this world. But I also think this question about postmodernism, it relates to a question I almost asked you. I think your question is better than mine. My question was gonna be, is Stevenson literary? Which I think is a stupid question because literary is incredibly in the eye of the beholder, and it's like saying like, do I like this or do I think it's good?
Yeah.
That said, though, I do think one of the definitions of literary and one of the definitions of postmodern literature, those are separate categories but overlapping, is I think some of these writers you've mentioned, David Foster Wallace, Don DeLillo, Donna Tartt, they're very, very conscious about experimenting with the form of the novel, and in fact, maybe that's even their primary project, right? Like that kind of like, I am a writer who is playing around with what this wonderful piece of art that I've inherited in the 80s or 90s or 2000s. I love novels, but I'm also going to try to take novels somewhere novel, right? And I think I don't think that's Stevenson's concern at all.
Right.
I think he's experimenting in the same way, and he's winking at the audience a lot. Hiro Protagonist. I remember in Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch, there's a moment where one of the characters refers to one of the other characters as an Artful Dodger-like character or something like that, and I'm sure that's Donna Tartt telling the reader, I know that that I am writing a Dickensian novel, or I'm updating a Dickensian novel. I think that, and Stevenson's doing an awful lot of that winking. I mean, even just the fact that if you work for the federal government, you get polygraphed a lot. Just all these little jokes about corporate culture. You described the sword fight happening in a bamboo field. It's actually a microbrew hops field.
That's right.
Which is another winking joke, right? And this is like kind of before microbrews really took off. It's another one of Stevenson's prescient little moments, because I bet a microbrew growing their own hops in a brown field in Los Angeles was pretty uncommon back then. And now you see that kind of shit all the time. So here's my hypothesis, which is this novel and many of Stevenson's novels actually he's not really concerned with the form of the novel. He actually really, what he wants to do is explore some ideas, that he's actually kind of at heart a theologian, a philosopher, a metaphysician, and he happens to make a living writing novels, and he happens to be really good at it, and he also happens to recognize that if he can make a cracking good, entertaining yarn that a 14-year-old would love reading and a 45-year-old would love reading, lots of people are going to read it. But I think the thing that's really driving him is he wants to think about, what is our brain, and what is language, and what's a virus. I could be wrong, but that's my hypothesis.
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, like, I think it's one of the reasons why when you suggested this book, I was like, oh my God, that's the perfect book, because I think it really does occupy the same space that we're interested in. Like, I think a lot of the writers that we're going to talk about, we're going to actually ask that question, like, is this literary? And then right after it be like, well, what the fuck does literary mean anyway?
Right. I mean, that's almost baked into the premise of naming a show Upper Middlebrow, right? Which
exactly.
is like,
yes.
like, obviously you and I care a lot about craft, but we're also very willing to dive into something that is accessible and isn't necessarily lauded as literary or lauded as art per se, even though I don't know, I feel like he deserves to be talked about next to David Foster Wallace and Don DeLillo. And actually with the best example, Chabon too, because I actually think that Chabon's writing style and Stevenson's writing style are close cousins.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of answered the question that, like, this is an action adventure novel with postmodern, I'm going to take out that word pretensions that I put in my question, with postmodern aspects. And I think it's also a postmodern novel that happens to be a gripping read for 14-year-olds for exactly the reason that you just said. He's interested in ideas, but is able to put them in a really gripping yarn in the same way. I think like Bret Easton Ellis is another author that's kind of in the same area. But yeah, that thing about Chabon, you're totally right. They're both fabulists, and yeah. I think that Chabon's fabulousness is a little bit more in the realm of sort of the emotional, and I think that Stevenson's fabulous tendencies are more in just the, like, thinking about taking an idea and running with it as far as you possibly could.
And clarify, since this is in audio, you mean fabulist spelled Fabulist, not fabulous, but like somebody who makes fables, right? That's the word that you're reaching for?
Interesting. I always, I might be wrong about that word, but what I have always taken fabulist to mean, and this is why it fits so nicely with Chabon. So this is great. I hope I'm wildly wrong, and we do put this out in the world, and everybody is like, oh wow, that's like that woman that thought that Xing was pronounced zing.
Yeah.
I've always taken fabulist to mean that, like, their stories are like in the world of the fabulous. So sort of like it's like taking the Sublime and throwing a bunch of drag queens into it, something like that. And I think that if you take that recipe, you get a significant number of Michael Chabon novels.
Yeah.
I love Chabon. I'm not throwing shade in any
Absolutely.
way.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was there's another paragraph that I really wanted to read that struck me as complete, like, a Chabon-esque section. It's page 227. It's when Hiro goes up to David's modernist castle, which I was just like, oh my God, it just keeps going.
Right.
Anyway,
in the Hollywood Hills, right?
In the Hollywood Hills, yeah.
Right.
So he is he pinches a beer from David's fridge and goes up there in what used to be his favorite place, drinking his beer slowly like he used to, reading stories in the lights. The old central neighborhoods are packed in tight below an eternal organic haze. In other cities, you breathe industrial contaminants, but in LA, you breathe amino acids. The hazy sprawl is ringed and netted with glowing lines, like hot wires in a toaster. At the outlet of the canyon, it comes close enough that the light sharpens and breaks up into stars, arches, glowing letters. Streams of red and white corpuscles throb down highways to the fuzzy logic of intelligent traffic lights. Farther away, spreading across the basin, a million sprightly logos smear into solid arcs, like geometric points merging into curves. To either side of the franchise ghettos, the low glow dwindles across a few shallow layers of development and into a surrounding dimness that is burst here and there by the blaze of a security spotlight in someone's backyard.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's funny. It's a very memorable moment, and one of the things I like about that has struck me about that moment, I have a couple things about it, but right before that, that's a moment where Hiro is reminiscing about going, and we might refer to this character as David. We might refer to him as David, but going to his friend and former employee's house, and how they would hang out, drink microbrews, and grill fresh seafood when they were kind of young, software developers and entrepreneurs together. And to me, there's this moment where Hiro is suddenly like in our universe. Like the world that's being described is very fabulous. It's very fantastic. It is a possible near future scenario, but extremely unlikely and cartoonish in many respects. But every now and again, Hiro just seems like somebody you would meet in Seattle. The other thing I found very striking about it is, what do you think he means that in LA you breathe amino acids?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, an eternal organic haze. There's got to be some detail in there as to why that is.
Is it related to the biomass idea? Is he saying you're breathing kind of like sweat and blood, and you're breathing humanity as opposed to breathing, hydrocarbons, or so? Is that what we're getting at?
Yeah, and not even humanity. I mean, like, by the time we're down to amino acids, I mean, we're talking about, building blocks of anything. And I mean, there's so much about this section that is primordial. I mean, The hibachi is rusted and buried in gray ash, like an archaeological relic. It's moments like this that you realize that, like, Stephenson is, a wild craftsman.
Yeah.
And that so much of what he's doing is setting up a whole bunch of the second half of the book, which is like this wild romp through archaeology and Sumeria and Assyria and,
and then like a waterborne sci-fi novel too, right? Like a kind of high seas future piracy. I mean, I believe there's even a style of science fiction called like raft novels. But anyway, it's a very, very powerful paragraph. And it's also, I think, one of Stephenson's talents, and at this phase, maybe one of his weaknesses. He's not, at this phase in his career, I think he gets better at it, not all that great about emotional inner life of his characters. His characters, they might be jealous, they might be frustrated, they might be scared, they might be angry. I think there's a good description. We're made to understand that Hiro is quite shaken up by his encounter with Raven. He doesn't really describe the feelings. He describes Hiro at like 3 a.m. in his boxers practicing sword fighting. And that's a good description, right? That's a good show not tell. Oh, Hiro can't sleep and he's up practicing sword fighting because he almost got gutted by this incredibly scary person. That makes sense. But I do think that Stephenson, at this phase in his career, is a master at these kind of surrealist oil paintings that you don't even really quite know what he's saying, but it does make you ache, He's sitting out there, he's looking down on LA, and he's experiencing something. He's experiencing this sense of connection to this organic biomass, I think. I mean, that's how I take that.
Yeah, it's one of the few moments in this book where the narration takes a break and kind of pulls back a little bit and allows us and allows Hiro to breathe a little bit and kind of ruminate. And we don't get many other sections like that. I mean, I really this always has struck me as basically the center of the book. I think you're totally right about the emotional reality, which is another reason why this book really speaks to 14-year-old boys.
Right.
But the very next page, you get one of those great panning out, wide shot with a big long list in it. That ends with a really great witty, a culture medium for a medium culture. Kind of clause towards the end. Yeah. And it's good, but you can also hear a little bit of like young Stevenson's edgelord kind of yeah, man, let's stick it to him.
And a little bit of the I want to be Hunter Thompson or Tom Wolfe. To me, actually, exactly. the medium culture really reminded me of Tom Wolfe. There's another moment that I found really profound like that I'm remembering. It's not one of these descriptions, but there's a moment where I'm like, I'm reading this kind of cartoonish, satirical, rollicking novel, and then there's Juanita's story about her grandmother. And which to me feels like it almost could come out of a different novel, Like it's actually a very profound memory. This is Juanita basically remembers her grandmother. Juanita, as a teenager, gets pregnant with her boyfriend, hasn't told her parents, and her grandmother visits. Her grandmother, I believe, is Mexican and maybe doesn't even speak the same or doesn't speak English. And I may be adding that detail, and that might be incorrect, but is able to sort of ascertain that Juanita is pregnant and hasn't told her parents in something like 20 minutes by watching her face. And that's why Juanita becomes a computer programmer who specializes in rendering faces in virtual reality, and kind of sets her. And it ends up being a plot point. And it ends up being character development. But it's also just like, wow, that could be a really powerful short story, about a granddaughter and a grandmother. And it's a really lovely adult moment in a book that, isn't all that adult a lot of the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Juanita is maybe the most adult character, right? Like she's kind of like her entire relationship to Hiro is like, you'd be a really great guy if you grew up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the moments of this book that goes a little awry for me is like the sort of re-sparking of their romantic relationship without much justification narratively for that.
There's a lot of shaky plotting. There's a lot of like, okay, the mafia and Mr. Aang and Mr. Lee are going to team up to try to kind of help humanity. Or like, yeah, Uncle Enzo just loves YT and we're just, there's a little bit of, like you said earlier, she delivers a pizza for the mafia, so they owe her a favor. And clearly she's talented. But there are a lot of moments in this book where what makes the plot thing happen, it feels a little bit shaky, a little. Yeah. But it's okay, right? Because you are kind of watching an anime, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's part of that's sort of what you're here for. And again, I think that's part of what the first couple chapters sets the palette for. Like you're like, oh, like this is what I'm here for. The most loving narrative descriptions of this book are going to be talking about the contact patches that the deliverator's car speaks to the road in.
Yeah, right. Or the relationship between, as I mentioned earlier, the Medicops and the enforcers, being compared. Yes. Something like the Salvation Army and the Green Berets. Or it wasn't literally the Salvation, it was the Peace Corps, right? That's right. Yep. Which is like, it's not an apt metaphor, right? It is an exaggeration of what but it is a comic exaggeration. But it is interesting, I think, that the book has moments of wisdom and profundity. And I think also we've gotten to the topic of Juanita. I think she is the locus. She's supposed to be the locus of wisdom in the book, too. Yeah. And the degree to which Stevenson has something to say, I think he has something to say theologically. Juanita represents that. And, the rebooting of their romance, it's a little bit shaky, but there's two things about it that kind of make it work for me. And one is, for whatever reason, Hiro, maybe because he lost his mafia job, maybe because he's got a crush on Juanita, deciding to take Juanita's ideas a little bit more seriously than maybe he has in the past, particularly the religious ideas. And so that's one. And two, there's this interesting insight he has that I actually recognized as a guy, in what we could say late youth, early middle age, the September of my youth. Which is when he recognizes Juanita's flirtation with him and is a bit confused by it, and then figures out, oh, she likes me even though she feels like maybe she shouldn't.
She likes me for me, regardless of all of the reasons that Hiro always worries that he's an asshole. To Juanita. And I think part of this book, and I think this is what you're getting at, is him kind of like putting that worry aside.
It's putting that worry aside, and it's also, I would say you could describe this book in a very simple way. Hiro's physical quest, his emotional quest, is becoming less of an asshole and becoming a more responsible, self-sacrificing, and thoughtful person. I think that's Hiro's journey, actually. Hiro's hero journey.
That's Hiro's journey. Somewhere Stephenson is happy that joke landed.
I would love Stephenson to listen to this one day. Neal Stephenson, thank you for giving us so much to think about and talk about. If you're out there. Do you want to go to our recurring segment?
Yes.
The as yet unnamed segment. And listener, if you have a name for this segment, you can actually send an email. Check this out, Chris. I did this earlier today to jpd@uppermiddlebrow.com.
No way. We have a. Why do you have an email address and I don't?
What would you like yours to be? I bought two, so there's one for you. I think
I think at this point it has to be CKB at Upper Middlebrow.
It could be BAG. It could be BAGG.
Yeah, let's go with that. Let's go with bag at Upper Middlebrow.
All right.
That's sufficiently confusing for everybody.
BAGG. All right. Well, we'll lock that in. This is a pilot, so we can edit this part out if we decide to change the name of this podcast. But I have a trivia question for you. So the segment,
cool.
The unnamed segment, is each of us is going to ask the other a trivia question that is, can be challenging, but it should be. There should be a chance. Like, you should have a chance. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. I think there could be trivia related to the book. This happens to be trivia inspired by the book.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
But you still might get it. Neal Stephenson took a computer programming class. No Googling, by the way.
Okay.
Neal Stephenson took a computer programming class in high school when he was in high school in Ames, Iowa. What technology did he write his software with? And I'm going to make it multiple choice to make it more doable. So,
let's see, are you talking, I kind of want to take a crack at this without the multiple choice, but are you talking about the actual computing language?
I'm not talking about the computing language. I'm talking about the physical input device. Like what did his hand contact?
Okay, well then, yeah, I will take the multiple choice then, because that could be, good God, a lot of things.
Okay. A, pencil and paper. B, a teletype machine. C, a punch card rendering machine. D, all of the three above. E, none of the three above.
Oh gosh, there is so much punch card stuff running through Stephenson. Oh boy, this feels like a trick. This is such a Stephenson-esque question, because I feel like it could be a trick question that could end up being like there's a sixth part of the multiple choice that's like, go fuck yourself.
If you put all the choices together, it spells a word. That's the actual answer.
I'm going to go with D, all of the above.
Yeah, I made it too easy, because I feel like any good test taker would have gotten that when I give you D. It was all of the above. I wish I hadn't, but I also felt like it would be too hard if I didn't give you that option.
You did the E, the none of the above was the part that had me sweating. Because I was imagining Neal Stephenson rattling out lines of code on like a dictaphone, or something.
Yeah, it could have been. He has this essay he wrote called "In the Beginning Was the Command Line," which was kind of a meditation on GUI, graphical user interfaces, and why more people don't use Linux and stuff like. Which actually it does relate to some of the themes. There's at one point where he refers to command line Linux as a tank, and he's like, "Why don't more people drive free tanks? Linux is free. It's a tank." And it very much reminds me of Mr. Ng and his wheelchair. /tank. But he would write his command, and I don't know what programming language he was using, but he would write the code on a pencil and paper. Then they had a teletype machine, which he would then type the machine into the teletype machine, and the teletype machine was connected to a punch card rendering machine, which would then turn it into a punch card. And then they had another machine where they inserted that punch card, and it would send tones down a dial-up modem to a computer down at the local university into that computer's, processor, and then the output would be spit out on the other end. I don't even fully understand what I'm saying right now.
Oh, I know. I love this stuff because my dad worked in not early computing, but he's worked in semiconductors his whole life. He remembers punch cards and I think for all of us that grew up after punch cards, there's this sort of analog reality to punch cards that just does not fit with our digital brains now. Yeah.
Even though punch cards are digital data, right? They're essentially what's happening on a microchip is just like, millions of punch cards, that are very, very, very small.
And I think, that is such that you can hear that little anecdote about Stephenson, and so much of this book makes sense about the interaction between the physical and the digital.
Well, and particularly the relationship between the programming language and the machine language, and how really good hackers start understanding machine language, and that is what makes them vulnerable to the virus, to the snow crash virus.
And also what makes them so powerful, like Mr. Ng. With that, one of the, not first, but early renditions of kind of a cybernetic character. There's so many role-playing games that
or Enki, right, is understood to be a kind of hacker. And this is a theme that's going to come back in other Stephenson novels too, about the relationship between hackers and wizards, which I think is an idea that Stephenson intends literally. I don't think he thinks that's an abstract relationship.
No, that's totally I think that's a one-to-one. And it just makes so many other books about, virtual reality, Ready Player One. You can really, there's such a debt of creation from those books to this one. Okay, my trivia is much easier. Okay. This is more of a how quickly can you get it. I feel like I should put a time limit on it.
All right.
In the world of Snow Crash, what are the 4 things that America is only good at now?
Okay, one of them is high-speed pizza delivery. One of them is microcode. One of them is, I think the other 2 are TV and movies. No, music and TV/movies.
Got it. There we go. Yes. The three M's, music, movies, and microcode. And then of course, and high-speed pizza delivery. Yeah. Nice work. Yeah. I wanted a simple one that captured what I think is a really crucial part of the flavor of this book. It's great.
And also, there's something behind to Tom Wolfe in that whole section, because he's describing the decline of American greatness and the American economy too. And those are the only 4 things that are left, right? That we're still good at. Everything else has kind of gone to shit, including our legal system and our military and our environment and safety. Which does bear some eerie resemblances to the world we're living in right now, where, there are way more AR-15s now than there were when Stephenson wrote this.
Yeah, I think you can't... in 1992, the idea of a privatized military was a joke, and in 2022, the idea of a privatized military is all too possible. It's already happening around the world, and it's only a small amount of time before it's happening more often here.
Burbclaves are a metaphor for, we don't literally have burbclaves, but, we do have gated suburban communities in which they don't literally call themselves like white mansions in our own, or like little Pretoria or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Not all of them,
New South Africa.
New South Africa. Right. I mean, he's satirizing something that really is, an actual thing, which is white people or other kinds of, privileged elites walling themselves off from everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. The one last thing, the one thing I really want to know is I want to know if Jennifer Egan has ever read this book. She's so inventive that I'm like, God, I could see her coming up with all of her stuff by her lonesome, but I know that writers don't act like that. I would just love to know if this is somewhere in her writerly DNA.
Jennifer Egan's another writer who I think I've only read a story by her. I don't think I've read a novel. You gotta do Visit from the Goon Squad. Well, I have on my list anything we forgot to talk about. I'm sure there's more we can talk about. Was there anything you really, really wanted? Anything like you where you'll kind of burst if we don't mention them?
How do you pronounce the word infocallypse?
Well, I can tell you how the audiobook narrator pronounces it, which is infocalypse.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that. What is your brain? Does your brain go with infocalypse?
Infocalypse. I think so. What would the alternative be?
They're talking about a literal collapse of information.
Yeah.
That this was one of those where I was like, my God, is he fucking with us? Info collapse? Like, it's so, they mean the same things, but I kind of wonder if he was just like, this will be like
collapse, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's both a portmanteau and like an actual word that he has coined, which is fun.
Well,
but it's another one of those where I'm like, like I wonder if that was intentional, accidental, or just luck.
One of the things that really, I know that we had a little bit of chatter before we had this conversation, and you were surprised to hear me say that I had kind of missed the whole Nam Shambavenki the first time around, which I do think when I was younger, I read more using audiobooks now, and one of the things that does is I don't skip as many paragraphs as I used to. But one of the things I think is genuine is how L. Bob Reif becomes incredibly important to this story, but he is his entry into the story is very subtle. Raven's entry into the story is not subtle, but there's two, there are two main antagonists, right? Raven and El Bob Reif. And if you compare, they both come in the same chapter, I think. It's the chapter where Hiro goes to the Black Sun. With El Bob Reif, I believe he's talking with a bunch of Japanese or Nipponese businessmen, as Stephenson actually uses those terms interchangeably, I've noticed. And it's only kind of later at some point, I believe Juanita says, hey, you might want to, learn a little bit about Reif. It takes us a while. I think there's so many details and there's so much exposition. It takes us a while, I think, to realize how important a character he is. And I think maybe that's part of why I didn't really track the plot super well the first time I read it, is that I kind of missed a lot of the early references that are explaining his early career before I realized how important those references were going to be to understanding what was happening in the second half of the book.
Yeah. And I think that's a good jumping off point for next time, because we'll definitely talk a lot about El Bob Reif in our next section when we talk about the second half of the book. And I have a very similar experience to you upon not this rereading, but my last rereading of this book, which was about a year and a half ago, about L. Bob Reif's place in the narrative, that I think is kind of picking up off of where you're going.
Yeah, it's. I do think this is a book that I wonder even if Stephenson intends you to read it twice, because there are details in the early chapters that don't make sense until you've already read the book, I think.
It gets back to that, and boy, we're getting off the deep end here, but that old E.M. Forrester quote that, like, the two things you read a novel with are intelligence and memory, and they don't And there's this great image that your intelligence is sort of the bright advancing line as you encounter the words on the page. And your memory is sort of the like glow that bright line leaves behind it. And you can't read a novel without either of them. And yeah, I think you're right that like this is such an example of good narrative craft. It's just very complex. There's a lot of little details that early on you're like, I don't know where that's going to pan out. But having read it a bunch of times, you start seeing them and you're like, oh my God, this is an intricate piece of work.
Tell our dear listeners what we are. I think we've implied it, but what are we going to talk about next time?
All right, next time we are going to wrap up our romp, our like hallucinatory walk, I don't know, I'm not even sure what to call this, through Neal Stephenson Snow Crash.
Our high-speed pizza delivery. It was not high speed. We took like 45 minutes describing it wasn't quite that long, but this was, we took a while describing recapping the plot before we got down to the analysis that we wanted to talk about. So yeah, we hope you will join us for that. This is a brand new podcast. What I'm saying to you might get cut out. We might change our format, but for now we are called Upper Middlebrow, and you can write me at jpd@uppermiddlebrow.com. You can write Chris Bagg at BAGG at uppermiddlebrow.com. Hopefully, I'm hoping we can get those emails. I haven't actually registered them yet, but I have the domain registered. Let us know what you think, and we will see you next time.
Let us know if there are books that you would like the two of us to give this, quote, treatment, unquote, to.
Yeah. Although I reserve the right for us to make our own decisions about that. It's gonna be
absolutely.
Man, if we keep doing this, it'll be a while before I relax and I'm like, okay, finally we've done enough of the ones I really, really, really wanted to do.
Well, that's good. There's always going to be more. Goddammit.
I hope so. I hope there will. I could do this for the rest of my life. Chris Bagg, this was so much fun. Thanks for agreeing to do this. I really
Jesse
enjoyed our
Dukes,
conversation.
This was a blast. I'm so enjoying this as a way to spend time together with my once and future roommate.
Until next time, do you want to hang after we say goodbye to the listeners and have a quick little wrap up, or okay? Then yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording on my end right now. Goodbye, y'all.
Bye.
Hello, it's Jesse again, and that was Upper Middlebrow Episode 1. Upper Middlebrow is a Small Point production. Jesse Dukes and Chris Bagg are the hosts, producers, and creators. Thanks to our pilot listeners, including Justin Reich, Catherine Nagasawa, Adam Brock, Robert Lorzell, Jenny Grieve, and Josh Lieberless. Music came from Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. And here are some sounds from Ivy, Virginia to take us out. Hopefully the Blue Jays are still singing. Blue Jays singing, acorns falling, leaves crackling, farmers farming, hunters hunting. See you next time, everybody.